Hello, I'm Dale Meyer, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the next part of our special SEMcast series. Joining us again is Concordia Seminary's Chair of Systematic Theology, Dr. Charles Arend. His new document is titled, Together with All Creatures, Caring for God's Living Earth. Today we're going to get deeper into our discussion about this new document put out by the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod Commission on Theology and Church Relations. What we want to talk about today, Chuck, is caring for creation. How do we care for God's creation amidst all the fellow creatures that God has put around us?
Well, it's a good question. I'd like to probably start by putting it in the context of the story that we discussed the last time around. Namely, that as you and I now go out into creation, as Christians, we recognize that we go out into a creation that is groaning. According to Paul in Romans 8. And as such, it calls us, on the one hand, to repentance because it groans on account of human sin and bondage to corruption, as Paul describes it. And on the other hand, it calls us to embrace the goodness of creation because it groans in anticipation.
You're like birth pains. Birth pangs.
That's the imagery that Paul is using, absolutely.
Okay, so there's a negative side of this, and we see that in the world of nature all the time. Not to mention some of the catastrophes that we bring,
right.
Oil slicks, for example. But the other side you're saying is when we look at this creation, despite its corruption, there are some wonderful things happening, and ultimately new heaven, new earth.
Right.
Okay?
And that provides the context in which we go about our task of caring for creation. One of the reasons I've used that language is the way Genesis 1:28 talks about having dominion over the earth and subduing it.
Strip mine it. Dominion over the earth. Strip mine it. We're supposed to use it, right?
That's one argument, yeah. But what's interesting, though, is the language for dominion is a language that is used with respect to kings. You think of Psalm 72, for example. The purpose of a king ruling is not to enhance his own position or wealth. The purpose for which he rules is so that everything flourishes under his rule. And when you stop to think about it, humans were given dominion over the animals and the birds. I'm thinking, well, they didn't need them for food. They didn't need them for clothing yet. So they were given dominion for some other purpose. And I would argue so that all might flourish under the dominion of humans just as it all flourishes under God's dominion.
How might that look?
How might that look?
In other words, we will not, and I don't want to get into anything with the coal miners, but we would not just simply ravage the earth to get the coal out of it. What will this look like as we see ourselves as stewards, can I use that word, caring for the creation in a way that benefits all creation?
Yeah, I would like to think at the very least, using the language not only of the dominion, but in Genesis 2:15, you have the language of serving or cultivating the earth and preserving it or protecting it. That human dominion would have worked in such a way so that all creatures would have had space to live, even as God created spaces for them. They all would have flourished. We would use the earth for the development of culture and civilization and art and music, but probably in such a way that it would not have caused harm to other creatures or excluded them from having spaces to live on earth.
So, for example, we would, if we strip mine, we would do it in a responsible way and reclaim the earth. Fair enough. In our town of Collinsville, Illinois, a lot of development has happened, and lo and behold, who's showing up at our doorstep? Raccoons, groundhogs, animals that have been chased out of their habitat.
Right.
And that, are you suggesting that as we develop our communities, that we provide green space for them?
Well, somehow...
I'm no fan of raccoons or groundhogs, but...
No, I mean, I've thought the same thing. We get a pileated woodpecker in our backyard, and I'm, on the one hand, delighted to see it. On the other hand, I'm thinking that's kind of sad because he's got nowhere else to go. So, yeah, how do we take into account that we share the earth with all of God's other creatures as well? Many of which have no purpose for human beings and seem to serve no purpose. Someone once quipped, that if humans had designed these creatures, no engineer would have designed an ostrich or an emperor penguin. I mean, and yet Job talks about how God delights in them, even in their wild character, if you will, though they serve no purpose, in a sense, for human beings.
Did Luther say something, and you know your Luther far better than I do, did he say something about the birds preaching the gospel to him? Or the animals reminding him of the goodness of God?
Yeah. Well, Luther has a nice, lively theology of creation. We'll talk about other creatures as the instruments and means through which God approaches us and speaks to us, about God's goodness. I mean, it's really from Luther, too, that I've taken this phrase, together with all creatures, because in the Small Catechism we say, God has made me. Now, we normally say, and all creatures, but it's really, God has made me together with all creatures. And so the interesting thing about this is that God did not give dominion over the earth to angels, spiritual beings. He gave dominion over the earth to those creatures, humans, who themselves were made from the earth, even as all the other creatures of the earth were made from the earth.
Is this where we bring in the theological jargon word incarnational?
We could, in one sense, by extension. I know we tend to use that specifically with reference to Christ, but I do think there is something to the fact that God selected us to have dominion over his creatures because we, in a sense, relate to the other creatures as fellow earthborn creatures and are, in many respects, interdependent with them. And in that sense, our theology fits well with the central insight of ecology. Everything is interconnected.
I was sitting in the front yard yesterday afternoon. Diane and I will do that at the end of the day. We sit out there and, like people who are getting older, talk about whatever we talk about. And a robin got a worm right in front of me. Pulled it out and gulped the thing down. Probably I got indigestion afterwards. Took that worm down. And I thought of the Psalm, I think it's 145th. The eyes of all, maybe it's not, the eyes of all wait upon thee, O Lord, the eyes of all, and thou givest them their meat in due season.
Right.
Thou openest thine hand and satisfiest the desire of every living thing.
Exactly.
And I thought, there's just a little, sort of insignificant, but a significant demonstration of me of how the Creator continues to take care of me as he takes care of the
That's
robins.
a really good
and all.
example. And in fact, I think that passage is cited a number of times throughout the Psalms. Job, I think, speaks about how the ravens and the wild lion cubs cry out to God for their food. So we take care of creation as, I like to say, as creatures among fellow creatures. And so as we go about taking care of creation, we do so not only with regard to human well-being and human lives, but also with regard for our other fellow creatures as well.
And then Diane will tell me the next morning, she said, Dale, feed the dog. we take care of that. That wonderful creature.
That's my job as well.
Is it? Yeah. And enjoy doing that. This is great. I think next time we get together, you want to talk about delight in the creation.
Yes.
And maybe we can pick up the idea that the same bird that got the worm the next morning is chirping at 3:30 a.m., waking me up. Thank you, Dr. Aaron, for your expertise, your knowledge, and your willingness to share it with us here on SEMcast. And as always, thanks to you for being with us. The Concordia Seminary website has many great resources to explore, and I hope you find them worthwhile. Please come back for the next episode of this special SEMcast series.